Welcome back to another episode of Live with Laura. I'm your host, Laura Hettiger, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation because it's going to bring together several of my loves. First off, the love of running. Secondly, the love of trusting yourself and trusting your body. And that's something that has really taken me a long time to understand, and I think a lot of other people too. And the love that we have for our healthcare heroes who can step in when we're having a problem and make us feel better. Let's talk about the running. First off, the 9th annual Laura's Run for Kids benefiting the Little Bit Foundation is this upcoming Saturday in Tower Grove Park. But there is another big run happening this Saturday just over to the east in the land of Lincoln, the Illinois Marathon, which takes place on the University of Illinois campus. It is a really cool marathon, a very flat course. And the person who's going to be running in this marathon, one of the many participants, is with me today in studio. If you know anything about the St. Louis running community, you've heard of this guy. We are so happy to be joined by Mark Spewak. It's good to see you.
Thank you so much for having me, Laura. This is so cool, and what an amazing spot you guys have here at KMOV.
Let's talk about you. When did you start running?
Yeah, so I started running when I was a young kid. You know, my family would participate in the turkey trots. My oldest brother was a high school cross-country runner, you know, kind of the inspiration of the family. And so, you know, when I got into middle school years, you know, I was probably the only middle schooler that actually thought that, you know, a high school kid wearing short shorts was really cool, you know, and he was like inspiration and his friends, and they, you know, they were very successful, and he went to go on and run in college. So that was kind of my motivation to get into cross-country and track and field, and kind of the rest, you know, was history from there.
But the history is amazing because, as I mentioned, if you know anything about the running community, you've heard of this guy because you have your own training team too. Before we get to that, I have to ask the quintessential St. Louis question. Where'd you go to high school?
Absolutely, yeah. So I went to Ladue High School. Yeah. So
and does Ladue have a good track and cross-country program?
Yeah. They have and so in middle school they had a program. Nowadays, I think they have even more developed programs, you know, than it was when I was there. But we had, you know, cross-country, track and field, and lots of great sports programs there.
So when you talk about cross-country specifically, how far are middle schoolers running in these meets?
Yeah, so cross-country, for anybody that's wondering, like, what is cross-country? Do they just, you know, go around and run in circles? You're running on grass, and so that's what kind of makes the sport really fun, you know? So kind of think soccer fields and think, you know, pastures and, you know, prairie land, all those places, and golf courses, anything that you know, that they can get permits on, that's where you'll kind of run through. And so in middle school, we ran, I think, roughly like 2 miles or so. And then in high school, you run 3.1 miles in Missouri. So it's a little bit of a difference, obviously, when you go up to the high school game. But it's just, it's a very unique sport. But I think if you meet anybody that's ever run cross country, they're a rare breed, you know, and you know, and it takes a lot at that age to want to be motivated to do that. And I don't think I necessarily would have known about it or gotten involved in it if I didn't have a sibling do it, because especially at that time, it was popular, but not anywhere near the popularity of what running is today.
And I didn't even realize cross country happened on grass, because there's a big difference running on grass versus an all-weather track versus marathoning that you now do, which is on open roads.
It's totally different. I mean, it's what is actually really exciting about cross country is you get to wear what we call cross country spikes. So think like a very lightweight shoe, and on the bottom of it, you get little spikes inside your shoes, and so it gives you better grip when you're running. And because it is so light, you just feel faster, and you have better grip to the mud and all the different types of things that you're going to be challenged with. Because when you run on the roads, like you could be running a race where there could have been a rainstorm the night before and there's some puddles, but nothing to the severity of what, like, we had a high school cross country meet one time out in Washington, Missouri at the Borgia Invitational, which was at an old golf course, and it was incredible. Big Driver, I think was what it was called. And there was so much mud. I mean, the most amount of mud I've ever seen and ever run across. And so because there's several races in a day, once the time you get to race, you know, all the kids had probably torn it up by the time we got there. And so it was just think about almost like that Tough Mudder entering cross country and people falling, you know, left and right, and you get to the finish line and it looks like you're jerseys all messed up. I mean, that's what makes it exciting.
And I'm sure you loved it, but as a
Your
mom,
parents.
I'm thinking, what was that laundry like? Oh my goodness.
It was the laundry and then the pasta dinners, with all the friends and everything. I mean, it's the parents, they had a big commitment to it for sure.
And how beautiful that you picked up a sport at such a young age that you can take into your adult years too.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about it, for most people, they play high school sports and then that's it. And, we all know that we have to stay healthy in life. But and I tell this to people all the time, especially my clients. We're so lucky that we found something that we actually really enjoy that we almost think about the health benefit to it second because we're so competitive with wanting to run faster times and accomplish these goals. We don't even really realize that just the pure consistency of participating in this sport is incredibly great for your long-term health and everything. And so that's one of the things I think that, especially for me, that I'm always trying to preach with people. And to your point, it's such a great thing to have a part of your life. And for most people, I sympathize with them because if you don't like to exercise or you don't really know what to do and there's nothing that motivates you, it's really hard to stay in shape. And then add kids, add family commitments and work. The years go on, it's even more difficult to be able to, to find that thing. So runners you're lucky in that sense.
I'm glad you mentioned the fact that you do have clients early in this conversation because you have really made a career out of running and helping other people run. Please tell me about your post-high school experience and what led you to creating your own training team here in St. Louis.
Yeah, so, I ran high school cross country. We won state my senior year at Ladue High School, which was just such an exciting thing, to be a part of. It was myself and, a lot of seniors on that team. And it was, kind of everything we'd worked for, and it came together. And I was kind of on top of the world, from there. And I went off to run at a small Division I school called Rider University. And I got there and I got redshirted. And coach is amazing there, Coach Hamer. I still keep up with him today. He gave me a shot, but I didn't take it serious enough at that point. I was partying too much. I wasn't going to sleep. I, wasn't taking care of my body. I like to hang out with friends and not necessarily go to class and all the things that you're supposed to do, when you're getting started your college career. And so I ended up failing out that first year and coming back to St. Louis and really realizing I can't go down this path anymore. I had such a great opportunity. Running meant so much to me. I loved competition. And then for the fact that, I kind of threw it down the drain, I wanted to make sure that kind of in my second act, I really lived with purpose and found a way to pursue the sport in a positive way. And so that led me to working at Big River Running Company here in St. Louis. And during that time, I was selling shoes. I was going to school part-time at Merrimack. And I just kept running, and kept getting involved. And that kind of put me in a position to start coaching high school cross country at Ladue High School and coaching the youth programs, and kind of one thing led to another, and somebody encouraged me to start a coaching business, and that was the next step for me.
And thank you for sharing your vulnerability at 18, 19 years old. The self-discipline, being on your own for the very first time, is incredibly hard. And I bet you really connect with the high schoolers that you do coach now and you have coached to just say, if you want to make this commitment, here are some of the things you need to do. Those are hard life lessons when you're first out of high school.
Yeah, I think that's the thing you don't realize at that age, because you think, when you're 18 years old, you have it all together. And you think also, too, that the decision that you make right there is the last decision you're going to make. And I remember, as my brother, when I was struggling in school, was kind of telling me, he was in med school at the time, and he's like, there's somebody, in their early 30s that's here, and you don't understand that concept when you're 18 years old, because you're thinking, 30 years old, I can't, I can't imagine all those years wasted. But then you really settle into the reality of it, and you realize just how young you are. And so I'm always trying to talk with the high school kids I work with and just helping them understand you're making a decision to go on to the next level, and it's okay if that decision isn't the same, what it looks like in a few years. You're making the best, possible, choice at this moment in time, and see it through for that period of time, and you'll have support no matter what happens when you get there.
I think that's a good time to transition into the support that you have had over especially the last year or two. You turn 30 years old, you get married, in 2023. I'm guessing life is pretty good post-pandemic. You're running, you're training people. What happened to you just in the last 8 or so months?
Yeah, absolutely. And so just to back up a little bit, when I was about, I'd say it was 2022 or 2021, I woke up one day and I just like couldn't move my legs. Like my body parts were falling asleep and I was having all these different issues. And I was a very competitive runner. I was running, 90 to 100 miles a week. And all of a sudden my body was just failing me. And it took me several years of kind of a lot of cross training and a lot of these weird setbacks. And we could kind of figure it out. I got multiple MRIs and all these different things. And so just before I got married, I actually was diagnosed with what they call a CSF leak, which is like a small hole in your spinal cord. And I had no idea of, how that, what that was and how it existed. But it really kind of led me down this really weird health journey where, honestly, before the last 8 weeks, last 8 months, like I was in a spot where I kind of had to learn how to move forward with life, continue to coach, continue to do the things I love and be involved in the sport, but in a totally different way than I had for so many years prior. And so it kind of leads me to the next step because in some ways what I just experienced was easier in my opinion because of what I had to kind of do the last several years. I've kind of already mourned my competitive running career. And so I found, and I'll never forget, so I kind of go back to this week. It was early October of 2025. And I really, in life when you just kind of find your jam, like when you found your happiness and, maybe there's a part for you that you can just kind of think like when you're with your kids and you're doing X, Y, Z, and you're doing the work. And I, although it wasn't perfect from a running standpoint, I had found a way to continue to run a few days a week, enjoy my health and wellness. I was having a great time. My wife and I, we haven't had kids yet. And so we're kind of in this, fun era of just experiencing life. We were kind of getting ready for the next phase. And I just felt amazing, like from a mental standpoint. Even though physically my body had been through some turbulence, I was in a really good place. And I remember, so I have the opportunity to, our Spewak Training is our coaching business, and then we started a nonprofit called Spewak Racing so that we could find ways to give back to the community. And one of the projects that we work on is that we sponsor a St. Louis City high school cross-country team called Confluence Prep there in downtown St. Louis. Shout out Coach Venson and the whole squad there. And so, we have the opportunity to buy their uniforms, pay for their shoes, and then he wants us involved in the program, which I think is so fun because it's beyond just a paycheck. It's for us to be, in these kids' lives. I know you understand this, from your work with your foundation. And so all this to be said, he invited me on a Thursday evening to Forest Park to teach his kids how to go through a full cross-country practice because they're downtown and there's not a lot of grass options for them. So a lot of their running, and like we talked about earlier, you need to learn how to run on grass, not the streets of St. Louis.
Vastly different.
So we go to Forest Park. I have the best night with the kids, just in such a good mental place. And I remember I called my good friend Sonny Ta on the way home, and I was just like, dude, this is so great that we're a part of this program and all these different things. And I go home, I smash a bunch of Oreos, and hanging out. And so I get up the next morning because it's we have our team practice in the mornings, and my wife wakes up just a little bit before me, probably about 4:45 or so. And it was one of those days where maybe because you're an early alarm clock, maybe your husband hears your alarm first and then goes back to bed and then has his alarm. So you learn how to kind of sleep through alarms. But
Yes.
I ended up just kind of waking up to her alarm and thinking, oh, I feel particularly good. I'm in a good place. And so I kind of laid in bed for a few minutes, and then my wife left the house and decided to go for a run. And she said that a few steps into her run, she just felt like something was off. She had to turn around. And that was really weird because anybody that knows my wife, she's a corporate attorney, she's very type A, she doesn't miss runs and she doesn't skip out on things. So she turned around, came back to the house, and that's kind of about when I decided to get out of bed. And I got out of bed like you do every single morning, and my first step out of the bed I just, like, I couldn't see. I was running into the wall, and there was just this loud ringing in my eye and my ears, and it was just this weird sensation. And so I got up, and I'm kind of walking down the hallway, and I'm just running into the wall. It's almost like, you're impaired. You kind of feel it's beyond even just that feeling, when maybe you're drinking or something. Like, it was just, I knew something was off. And so I go to the bathroom, and I'm still falling around. And I remember looking at myself in the mirror and just thinking, I didn't even recognize the person I was looking at. Like, it was just horrifying. Like, you just were so pale. So I kind of like stumbled over and laid on the ground. And because I had all these health issues prior, the CSF leak, what would happen is I'd have these weird symptoms where I would have stuff where I, couldn't talk or couldn't walk, and just weird things. So I think my wife and I both kind of felt that I was having some type of CSF leak reaction, even though I had had a procedure a few years ago for it. I still had lingering problems, and we just didn't think much about it. And so we both kind of agreed, like, just go, we'll just wait and see how, how things are going in a few minutes. And so she told me, go lay in bed, and I'll set an alarm for 10 minutes, and then I'll come back downstairs after 10 minutes. And I always joke with her because I'm like, it was not 10 minutes. I was like, I swear it was like 20 minutes. I was like, you probably started the timer when you got upstairs. But I'm laying in bed, and I'm thinking, am I having a panic attack? Like, what is going on right now? Like, I'm very, very rational about, like, what am I experiencing, and what is this situation? Because at that point, now we got to figure out if we're going to call the doctor, if we're going to call an ambulance, and try to make that decision from there. And ultimately, when I'm laying in bed there, I just realized that something wasn't right. And so she'd come back downstairs after the 10 minutes were done on the alarm, and she handed me my phone. And I remember I was looking at my phone, and I couldn't, like, the number or like a letter that I was trying to text out, I couldn't catch it with my eyes. It would be like floating all over the screen. And that's when things started to get a little bit worse. Now, I did have, like, in that moment, that ability to say, okay, something's really off. I need you to cancel my 10 a.m. I need you to cancel 3 o'clock call, 4 o'clock call. So I was able to, like, be alert enough to know, like, this is a problem, but also I need to make sure I clear my day, because this is clearly going to be more than just a trip to the doctor. And so our doctor, had called us back and encouraged us to go to the ER. And so, it was a tough decision to make, because I think, one of it, male ego, a lot of pride. I didn't want an ambulance to come, and second, I also didn't want, it to be something where I was just having a flare up and then I had to go to the hospital. And I point that out because I think it's a really important part of my story, because when the EMS arrived at Webster Groves, they came into our house, and at this point, my symptoms were getting worse. Now I'm getting nauseous, and I can't really see well, and I'm not able to speak, and so it just kept progressing. And the EMS got inside and evaluated me in my bed, which is such a surreal feeling when you're laying in bed and you're awake enough to know these guys are looking at you and they're talking to you like, Mark, running you through these tests. And that's when I really realized, okay, maybe I'm not overreacting. Maybe this isn't like, just like anxiety building up. This is possibly something serious. And we had wanted to go to another hospital where my doctor recommended and where my parents wanted us to go to. EMS were like, you need to go to Mercy South. It is the closest stroke one level center in St. Louis to your house.
Okay, let's talk about that S word,
yes.
Stroke. They said the word stroke?
In that moment, they said, based on what you're experiencing right now, we have to take you there because you could be having a stroke.
Had that crossed your mind throughout
Never.
the last hour of these symptoms progressing?
Never. Not one thought of stroke. I thought CSF leak. I thought, honestly, as silly as it sounds, I thought I had a diabetic reaction to the Oreos I ate the night before. I was thinking, did I finally get diabetes, from all the sugar I eat? Like, I didn't, I did not know what it was. It was one of those things where that's the last word that you think somebody's going to say to you, and so once they told me that, because they're saying, in that moment, they're saying, this is what we're possibly treating you for, I don't think I still even took it as serious because, I knew that I'm not in an MRI machine. I knew that they were just doing their job and that they have to follow these procedures, but nobody could definitively tell you that you were having a stroke. Now, what happened next was we ended up going into the ambulance, and that's when things really got worse.
And I think that is a good time to pause because we're up against a commercial break. And as we do take this next break, I would encourage you to share this because the person I'm sitting across from is in fantastic shape. He's young. And now all of a sudden at the age of 32, he's being loaded into an ambulance and being told you might be having a stroke. This is something that should cause you to pause and think and really listen to the symptoms that he was experiencing, and also share this story, Mark's story, with your personal circle, even if your circle is as healthy and fitness savvy as Mark and his friends are. We're going to take a quick break, find out more on what happened next with Mark. You are watching Live with Laura. Welcome back to Live with Laura. I'm your host, Laura Hettiger, sitting across from a running legend in St. Louis. And I don't use that word flippantly because, Mark, you really are. Anyone who's been in the St. Louis running community for probably the last decade knows you. You do a really good job of promoting running. You have your own training. You're kind of the go-to. When media people have questions about running, we find you. But yet you're so young. Right now, as you sit across from me, you're 33. In October, you were 32. Where we left off in this conversation, you were being loaded into an ambulance on a Friday in October with the word stroke now being suggested. What happens next?
Yeah, so I ended up, getting into the ambulance, and at that moment, I think I realized something was more serious happening. Like I said, I don't know if I actually really realized that I was definitively having a stroke because, you kind of understand in those moments that, EMS, their job is to rule out things and to find possible, problems and treat in front of them until they get you to the hospital. Mm-hmm. And I was just trying to kind of stay positive and in a good place. And I got into the ambulance, and it was funny because one of the guys that runs with our group, he's a firefighter at Webster Groves, and so I'm asking the EMT, do you know Nolan and whatever, and we're kind of having this kind of very weird just conversation about Nolan and how great of shape he's in.
Mm-hmm. Which might be nice because I would assume since you're connecting and talking about someone else, maybe that takes your mind off just for a second the situation you're in.
Yeah, I think in some ways, I realized that guy had a job to do, mm-hmm. and I in some ways I just wanted to kind of keep things status quo, and it was just another day at the office. It was 6 a.m. on a Friday morning for him, and mm-hmm. I just kind of kept it there. But what ended up happening was I got into the ambulance, and they're evaluating mm-hmm. you and just trying to kind of figure out what's going to happen from now until you get to the hospital. And they determined at that point they wanted to take me to Mercy South because they're a level 1 stroke center. Mm-hmm. And I know my wife had said to the ambulance driver, she's like, I really don't want to go there. I want him to go to the hospital that my doctor, suggested. Mm-hmm. And the ambulance driver basically said to my wife, you have to go to this center.
Time is of the essence.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And he's like, if this was my wife, this is exactly what we would do. And that's all she needed to hear. And the rest was kind of, just a smooth sailing until I get into the car and into the ambulance. And that's when things got a lot worse. I ended up just profusely vomiting everywhere. I could not stop vomiting. It was just being so sick. And that's when I felt very alarmed. And I know my wife the driver said to her, because she was sitting in the front seat, that was a bad sign. Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably when everybody in that, facility kind of knew, okay, this guy's probably having a stroke. He's kind of now crossing off all of the symptoms of this specific type of stroke.
That's so interesting because I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with the American Heart Association and various cardiologists who come on the show that give the warning signs. And isn't the word fast always associated with a stroke?
Correct, yeah.
With face and arm. I don't remember the S or the T. But I never remember vomiting.
Yeah. So here's the reason why. So when I was when I got to the hospital, and I'll share a little bit more about how that procedure worked in terms of their processes, because it's really fascinating, and it's huge credit to their team at Mercy South. But I had a cerebellum stroke. And cerebellum is the part of your brain that is everything to do with your control, your movement. And so it was almost like as if I was flipped upside down. Think about being like on a roller coaster and being at the point of the roller coaster where, you're upside down, but that's now every moment of your your life at that point. And so that's what my body and my brain was experiencing. And so when you're having a cerebellum stroke, vomiting is very common because of that. And it's a very small percentage of people have cerebellum strokes. There's not a lot of people that are out there that are living today with a cerebellum stroke. And that's something that always kind of gives me goosebumps, because there's actually a guy at my wife's work who had to take several years off work, and he's had just a tremendous comeback, and he's now a lawyer, but he had a cerebellum stroke. And he was telling my wife, I really need to meet your husband, because there's not many of these survivors that are out there. And so that's just part of it that kind of makes me feel very fortunate, because I really realized, hey, this could have gone completely different, than what happened. And so when I got to the hospital, you're in this ambulance and they're driving. You always wonder, you see an ambulance driving down the road, it's going really fast and the lights, sirens are on. You always think, what's going on in there? And I was in that experience, that was me for once. That was kind of a surreal feeling to kind of be aware of that in the moment. But because I was so sick, I don't think I, at that point was thinking too much. Got to the hospital. And I met with, it had to be 6 to 8 people, doctors, nurses, and they immediately are evaluating you. And they're doing all the different types of tests. If you've seen the show The Pit,
so it's very much like that?
It was very similar, honestly. They're right around you. You're being rolled in. They're doing simple, quick tests. And I was probably in an MRI machine and a CT scan within a minute. Wow. I mean, the evaluation was so fast, and they got me right in. And that's exactly what you said. Everything when it comes to stroke is about timing, because they can, in some cases, give you a specific drug. Forget what the intervention's specifically called, but it's only based on if they know when the last time you were doing okay. And because I woke up with a stroke, they weren't able to give that to me, because they can't figure out, okay, he went to bed 8 hours before, but when did the stroke start?
That is exactly what I was thinking. And I was thinking, oh, what a blessing that the stroke started when you woke up, because you woke up feeling great. And then you put your feet on the ground and you're like, I don't feel so great. So the doctors are now suggesting maybe it started while you were sleeping?
Yeah, they just don't know, because there is no time that I was awake, where I was normal, because I was feeling okay, but I was laying back in bed. And how many times do we wake up in the morning where we're laying on our back and we don't know, how we're going to feel, a few minutes later when we get out of bed. So just don't really know what ended up happening. I just know that, when my symptoms started and how things progressed. And so they put you through the ringer when you're in the hospital. They put you in the MRI machine and the CT scan. And that's protocol, which is honestly in a lot of cases above and beyond. And so that's a huge shout out to Mercy South.
Yes.
Because, some places you're just going to get one or the other. And so a CT scan isn't going to show everything right away. So that's why they do that MRI, because that's going to show definitively, hey, this is what's happening. And you can kind of go with both results. And so go in there. I'm still really sick. And if anybody's ever been in an MRI machine or CT scan, it's already an experience that's not super fun for people. I had the fortune of being in many before, so I really at that point, I didn't really care, but I was really sick and I was stuck in this machine, and I apologize, but I was still vomiting.
Yeah.
And so I remember one of the head nurses that was in the room was like, did you have anything weird last night? And that's kind of when I said, well, I did have Oreos last night, and maybe I'm just having some diabetic reaction or something. And I think that at that point they're just trying to figure out what's going on. And I remember being wheeled out to the area. I guess it was just a room in the ER, and the doctor came in, and my family's there, so my wife, my mom, and my dad were in that room. And the doctor walks in and says, there's no easy way to say this. You suffered a stroke, and I'm so sorry to be the one to have to share that news with you. And I just remember thinking, man, that sucks. Like, that, I think that was literally what I said. This sucks. Like, I can't believe it. And I think, my wife describes this, like, my reaction was very much like a disappointment in myself, because I'd been working for so long these last several years to figure out all these health challenges. And I'd been through the ringer with the CSF leak and all these different things. And so I felt like in that moment, a failure in some ways, because I've been doing everything I can to live this healthy lifestyle. And here I am. I just had a stroke. And now I have to put this through with my family and my wife right here. It just was that surreal feeling. But also hearing the word stroke, like, when I was waiting in there, it wasn't a long time, but I was not thinking that they were going to find something, because I had gone through so many years of issues with health problems. And I think probably a lot of people resonate with that. You have something wrong with you, and the doctors, maybe cannot figure it out. So when they tell you something so definitive, such as the word stroke, I think stroke is one of those words like cancer that just, it holds a different meaning, and it's very terrifying. My grandma passed away from one. And so when I heard it, it was like, it just was just a shock, it just rocked me to the core.
And a shock because, again, we can't reinforce this enough. You were just 32.
Yes.
I'm going to guess you've never smoked a day in your life. Smoking, of course, is a huge contributing factor when people have strokes. Diet, lifestyle. You are a distance runner. You are a marathoner. Yeah, you had Oreos the night before, and I'm guessing you don't have too many Oreos now. A little PTSD from those. Yeah. But you have a great diet. So to me, the disappointment in yourself is one thing, but I think I would have just been like mad at the world. What are you talking about? I do all these things. How is it this? So when did you realize that maybe it's a condition that you've always had and didn't just know about?
Yeah, so from there, like, and I know we spoke off air about this, for doctors, it's such a, it's another day at the office for them. So they hear, and we're now watching The Pit. I'm like, oh, I'm kind of understanding this, not a big deal for them, but not to minimize any of the work that they do. But when they realize that I don't have the stereotypical, necessary risk factors for a stroke, it's very easy for them to go down the path that they did. And so what ended up happening was, it was surreal. That whole Friday was crazy, because it really started, 6, 7 a.m. in the morning. So I'm there, at 8 a.m., and they put me right into the step-down unit at the neuro division at Mercy South. Immediately, you're met with the nurses, they clean you off, and you're just kind of put into this process. And then they put a big note on my door: do not disturb sleep. He's supposed to be sleeping. And my parents and my wife were super upset with me, because I didn't want to sleep. I wanted to talk about it. I was like, I can't sleep right now. I was like, I feel so horrible, like, what's going on? And throughout that day, that's when you're kind of being evaluated by neurology and by cardiology and really anybody. They brought speech therapy in right away. They brought PTs in. It's the assessment process to kind of figure out, okay, where are you and how long are you going to be here for? And what they ordered was what they call a bubble test, a bubble study. And that's their way of looking into your heart and seeing if you have this condition called a PFO. And so 1 in 4 people are born with a PFO, which is just a small or big hole in your heart. I don't know the size of, what it was for me, but that's something that most people live with. And they'll never know in their life that they have it. And even if they do know they have it, if they don't have a stroke, they're not going to be able to fix it because, we would probably be loading the hospital with, millions of people every single day. And I don't say that to scare anybody, but it was something that to me was so shocking to hear. But at the same time, for them, it's just, it's procedure for them to look at this and see it. And that's a very possible way that you can have a stroke. And essentially, you throw a clot. So I don't know how I had a clot, but you throw a clot and it goes, because there's this hole in your heart, it's able to get through your lungs and go through your heart, and that's how it gets to your brain. And so the test they did on me, and I still laugh about this because they had this young nurse come down to do it, And she came in and she was like, it was a Friday afternoon because by this time that she did the test, and she was like on her way out, and the doctor was like, hey, can you please do this for me? And she's like, I'm leaving. And then he's like, well, he's really young. And so she came. And then I vomited on her.
Oh.
So because I was still so sick. And I apologize to her if she's out there listening. But she was able to see that, like, hey, she wasn't able to say anything, but she was like, oh, this is interesting. This is probably your doctor. So it wasn't 100% conclusive. And so a few days later, they do this test called a TEE test. And that's when they actually go inside and they're able to take a look at your heart. That procedure itself was stopped because the doctor at that moment thought there was a blood clot in my heart. And this is just a few days after having a stroke. And so the story continued, and so at this point, he wasn't able to tell clearly if you have a PFO or not. So I'm still kind of in a limbo at that point where, I'm thinking, okay, what is the cause? My doctor felt, and shout out to Dr. Sheehy at Mercy South, he felt very confident that this was a PFO. He's like, yes, the findings that they just had, that's what they found, but this is what myself and several doctors on my team think. And so I was in the hospital for about a week, and then they transferred me over to the Mercy South rehab facility from there. But I was living with this idea that I had a PFO, but I didn't 100% know. So it was one of those things where, you feel kind of good about the fact that you're under their care, but you also are trying to think in the back of your head, I don't know. Like, this could be something where, am I going to have a stroke in a few more days? Is this going to keep continuing? And the last thing I'll say is, like, when I was in the hospital, once I had the stroke, like, it took everything out of my body. I was so exhausted. I was so tired and just so fatigued and just out of it. I barely could speak for a few days. My speech was off. I wasn't able to walk. I couldn't move my legs. I really was thinking, like, am I paralyzed? What is going on? And a few days in, they try to get me out of bed to do occupational therapy. And that's one of their ways to kind of assess, okay, where are you at? And, are you fit to go home? Or are you going to need to go to the rehab facility? So I got up and did probably something very simple, like put, probably wash towels or something into a cabinet. And then I immediately passed out. And my heart stopped for like 12 seconds when it happened. And so they, call a code blue, and my wife's there, freaking out, and fortunately, everything was fine. It just happened that I was just very frail. I'm barely eating, and my body is just really just severely injured from the fact that I had this severe brain injury. Then a few days later, they tried to do another PT test for me, and I had the same problem happen. And that's when they decided, we're going to put you into a CT scan just to see what's happening. And that's when they caught that there was a second stroke. So they assume, because the CT scan shows up a little bit later, they assume that I probably had a stroke possibly on that first day. Probably had that first stroke in the morning, and then probably something within that first day, there was that second stroke that happened. So I share this because when I'm in the hospital, it wasn't just this clear cut, hey, this is what's happening, here are the problems that you have, and this is how we're going to fix it. Every day was a mystery. And so I had to, when that happened, that would set me back, because then I couldn't get PT the rest of the day or do it the next day. And then that would cause me to have to get another test, And so it left me kind of in this limbo, and my family in a limbo, where for a whole week we're just trying to figure out what's going on. And there were definitely times where you're thinking, like, am I dying? Like, what is, why am I experiencing this, and why am I worse than I was a few days ago?
We are sitting, though, across from a very alive Mark, thank goodness. And throughout all of this, the running community starts to realize something very serious is going on with one of their greatest ambassadors. And a campaign of Miles for Mark begins. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back and find out how you can still get involved with this campaign and what life has been like for Mark in the last 6, 7, 8 months. And the fact that he's doing a marathon in less than 48 hours, it's amazing. We'll be right back. We have a few more minutes together here on Live with Laura as I sit across from Mark Spewak, who is very well known in the St. Louis running community. And I think we've now done about 25 of these episodes. And I am so intrigued by your story of what has been happening to you over the last few months. Where we left off, you were in Mercy South for a week. It's determined at the age of 32, you have now had not one, but 2 strokes. You're moved to the rehab facility for 10 days. You'd only been married 2 years at this point. That's a lot for your wife to see her young husband go through. You move back in with your parents for some additional help for about a month. You finally get back to your house in mid-November. What's it like that first time you walk back into your house?
Yeah, it was just very, feeling very free, and feeling like I had my independence again. Because when you're in the hospital and you're in rehab, you get very used to the fact that you don't have the ability to just do what you want to do. I mean, they put a beeper on my wheelchair and on my bed and everything, and so I wasn't able to get out of bed unless I call a nurse, and then to be able to leave my room and things like that. And then when I got home, and my parents and my wife have been incredible. They've just been my rock throughout this whole process. But they witnessed so much of what I went through, and then they're getting obviously the expertise from everybody that's helping them in the discharge process. Their feelings towards me walking up steps and taking showers without the shower chair, they were very much, wanted to be cautious and make sure I was okay. And I felt like, hey, I can do all the things I want to do.
And that's kind of what I'm amazed by, the people around you too, because it would be really hard seeing someone you love so much there, again, being told you've had 2 strokes at this young age. I would think I would almost want to keep you in bubble wrap. So when were you given the green light to return to an active lifestyle? Because if you are just joining us, this guy is running a half marathon in less than 48 hours.
I was able to start, kind of getting into the rehab process outside of the period that I left the rehab facility, because they transfer you over to just outpatient rehab with Mercy. And it was fantastic. That's when I started to be able to start doing some of the things. I mean, on a very small scale, one of the ways I had to basically show that I was ready to leave the rehab facility was being able to walk without assistance. And so by those last couple of days, I kind of graduated to being able to walk around the building, without anybody next to me. And that was so cool. Every morning I would wake up in the rehab facility and I'd ride my wheelchair around the halls for 30 to 45 minutes, because in the mornings I always get up and I go for a run, or do a workout. And so I wanted to kind of keep that routine. And it was pretty funny because one day I rode it and then I went outside the facility. It was before it had opened, and I ended up basically going down the parking lot and realizing it's really hard to get a wheelchair up the parking lot. And then I get stuck at the door and I can't get in, and somebody has to help me. And so it caused a little chaos out there. But that, because of all the things I was doing, like my mindset from the day I was in the hospital to rehab was so much like, I'm, still working out, even if it's not the way that it looked like, it was still, I was mentally, from speech therapy to physical therapy to OT. So that transition in some ways for me wasn't very crazy. It just, I was able to start doing more than what I'd been.
I am just so amazed that you never took on the victim mentality, because being in a hospital bed for a week, being in a rehab facility where you're still not moving a ton for an additional 10 days, your muscles atrophy very, very quickly. And to not just be so mad at how many changes have happened to you physically in such a short amount of time, that's a testament to your mental health.
I mean, for me, Lexapro probably, played a huge factor in just having a good attitude. I really think when I look back on it, especially when I got to rehab, I was around some really inspiring people. And I don't even think I ever would have even guessed that I would be as amazed and motivated by, people who are much older than me in that kind of setting. Because when I got there, the first thing we did, we had like a group activity on a Saturday. And I remember I'm in this class, I'm the youngest person in it, and really what we're doing is we're playing bingo, and then we'd have to like lift a weight over our head. And the weight was probably a 1-pound dumbbell, and I couldn't do it. And it was just devastating for me. And I'm in this room where everybody is struggling with it, and that was so powerful because everybody was encouraging me. And I was thinking they're probably looking at me like, how come you can't do this, and it was the opposite. It was like, keep going. And then there was a guy in there who had an amputated leg, and he had such a great attitude. And in the first week that I was at the rehab, all my like group activities, I was in the sitting class with a wheelchair because they weren't letting me walk yet. And then I graduated like being able to get out of the wheelchair and do some stuff. Well, in those classes, like the stuff that we're doing is like wave your hands and things like this. And, I'm struggling. And this guy over here, who I feel like is going through a much more difficult time than me, is telling me, keep up the great work. And then there was a woman named Linda who had a stroke, and she was probably in her 70s. And she kind of talked a little smack with me in the hall and different stuff like that. And then when we were in that rehab room, everybody's there working out, and she was motivating me. She was encouraging me. And when she started walking before I did. So she kind of like, made it a point to let me know, I've been walking, longer than you have. But it was so much this camaraderie. And so it was such a positive experience. And I can't say enough great things about their team there, from the doctors, the nurses, the therapists, to the technicians, to cafeteria staff. Everybody there wanted to see you successful, from front desk. And so that's what kept me so positive.
From what I know about you, though, from the first time I interviewed you, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, you are that person for everyone around you. You are the motivator. So I would have to think, going through this experience, it kind of takes you back to all of your past running histories, because I know you've done races and runs where you hit that mental wall where you're like, oh my gosh, I cannot take another step. And then you hear someone saying, go, Mark, you've got this. And you've done that for people too. It's interesting that these two situations are kind of similar.
Absolutely. I think that so much of the parallel of my past and the motivation that I had in endurance running and the encouragement of our community and teammates and things like that, it was just I had new teammates, and that was Linda at, the rehab facility, that was the nursing staff at Mercy South. There was always somebody there to be so positive. Like my wife and I every morning would put together a stroke playlist on Spotify. We were just trying to find songs, and there were some student nurses that were working, and they were trying to figure out music for us too. You never really felt like, to me, that I was like in this dark, sad place, because I had so many people checking in on me, helping me. I never went there. And I feel like also too, like if I was going to be successful in my return, I couldn't go there. I had to make sure that like when I went to rehab, I knew it was an honor to get there, because you have to be cleared by insurance. And I was on the border of going to rehab because I'm young, and because of the fact that there's lots of people that have strokes and they never get rehab. And I've met people like that, and they've struggled significantly because they haven't gotten that help. So in a lot of ways, I knew that this was something that I needed to be grateful for, because I went to basically boot camp for 10 days, and I got to get the most out of myself every single day. I had a schedule. They put a schedule in your room at I'd go to bed at like 7 o'clock every night. I was so tired. And they would put a schedule in my room at like 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night. And I'd wake up multiple times a night. And I just was so excited to see the schedule. It'd say PT at 9 a.m., OT at 10 a.m., speech therapy at 1. And that was so cool to know that they were going to have a dedicated team for me every day to push me to the next level.
The team existed, though, well beyond the rehab, because you decided to share this story, not just with your friends, not just with your running team, but with all of St. Louis. I found out that you had had your strokes through one of our reporters doing a story on you. And I sent you an email afterwards saying, oh my gosh, I am so sorry. And this was back in the fall. And then all over social media, I start seeing Miles for Mark. What was that campaign like?
Yeah, it was surreal. And first, thank you for reaching out to me during that time. That meant a lot. But I was not expecting it, for sure. Like, I am somebody that likes the attention, but then when I get the attention, I hate it. And so Stephanie True is a longtime runner with our group, and she is the human that she should have recognition. She should have a million awards. She long time worked at Afton School District, high level educator, in education, and just has motivated and inspired so many people over the years, and then has her own running. But her whole life is dedicated to other people. And she decided she had to do something. And so she made the choice to put up on social media this kind of movement, Miles for Mark. And she knew, and I interviewed her actually here recently on our team podcast, and she said, I knew he's going to hate me, but I had to do it. And I was like, I don't hate you. But at first I was like, if you would have asked me, I would have told you, no, absolutely not, do not do this. But she just encouraged people to go out and run and label your run on this app called Strava or Instagram or anything that you kind of use for social media, just Miles for Mark. And it just took off. I mean, people everywhere did it. And it was so great for me because at first I was really worried about it and I didn't want that kind of attention, even though I'd put my story out there. But then I was in rehab every day seeing these posts. And so I was logging my wheelchair workouts and all the rest of the stuff on Strava with my watch. And so people were able to see that, and then they were posting their runs, and we had some kind of nice banter back and forth. And just the whole movement in itself was just so inspiring and so just powerful. And I'm so grateful for Stephanie because it was her ability to think about me and think about the community, and I know it meant a lot to not just her, but our entire team.
And that's the cool era that we are living in, where you are able to connect with so many people, but also raise awareness. Because again, I look at someone like you who has lived such a healthy lifestyle, who has all these miles behind him, and you would just never think that a stroke would happen to you. So even you've learned a lot about PFOs, it sounds like, and you said 1 in 4 people, those are the statistics.
Yeah.
And hopefully of the millions of people that are walking around right now with a PFO, nothing ever happens.
Yeah.
And they live their lives and probably die with a PFO never needing to be closed. But if there's anything that if someone wakes up like you did on that Friday in October, and by knowing your story, they take those warning signs seriously and quickly and get help, then it can turn into a success story too.
Absolutely. And I think that's the thing that I would hope that anybody learns from my story is sometimes you hear these things and it can really scare you and it can make you think, oh, I had a headache last week. Did that, lead me to something? But just check it out. If you haven't been to the primary care doctor in a while, go. If you've been stubborn enough to not go check on something, if you're ever in doubt, just get it checked out, because at the end of the day, you don't know. And I'm a prime example of it. I didn't realize the severity of my problem, but I did know that it was getting worse and that it was also going to put my wife through a lot if I just tried to suck it up that morning too. And the other stroke survivors that I've been lucky enough to meet, they all feel the same way. Because I think in some ways, what I experienced as graphic and as horrible of a day October 3rd was for me, because I had all those symptoms, I was able to get the help that I needed. I've met stroke survivors who go to work with just a fuzzy brain and eye problems, and they're out of it. Not saying by any means they're experiencing a great day, but stroke would be 10th, 12th on the thought process of somebody if you Googled it. They just have vertigo or headaches, and they don't really realize what they're experiencing. And a lot of times they go somewhere else. Like I knew a guy who went to his optometrist before he ended up at the hospital. And his optometrist was like, you're having a stroke. And I know somebody else that went to urgent care, and they were, surprised. What are you walking in here? You're having a stroke. And so I think it is so important to recognize the signs and understand them, and then also to advocate for yourself and just understand that, yes, it's expensive. Healthcare is very expensive, but at the same time, you are never going to regret, getting the help and care that you need. And there are just amazing healthcare providers that are out there that are there to be able to support you and also help you understand that this is a big deal, but you can live with these things, and this is how you can get back on your path.
When you are running, and we don't have much time, when you're running on Saturday, I have a feeling your heart is going to be full of gratitude for all the people you've met through this recovery process.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much. It's an honor to be able to sit here and, share my story and just just being able to be alive. I mean, as cliche as it sounds, every single day of my life now, I'm excited and fired up to be able to just simply do the things that, I love doing.
Thank you for the gift of your time today. We appreciate it. And good luck on Saturday. And friends, until next time, thank you for listening, thank you for learning, and thank you for being Live with Laura.